If you haven't heard, the new Pupil Slicer album goes hard. And I was lucky enough to interview Kate about it a few months ago, and she sent me one of the visual aids that she used to teach a riff from terminal Lucidity to the drummer Josh. And I'm going to spend the rest of this video making it your problem. Here's the riff. So, like a lot of mathcore riffs, it's built on these strings of 3s and 2s, dotted eighths and eighths, in the tab that Kate gave me. The fact that there are only 2 types of durations in this riff means that you can represent it very efficiently, which is what Kate did. You don't need standard notation, all you need is a system with 2 types of symbols. For example, the letters L for long and S for short. I think there's a kind of symbiotic relationship here for a lot of mathcore bands between the types of riffs you can write and the ways you can represent them visually. Riffs like these can have kind of long alternating meter structures without clear internal rules for repetition, but you can dramatically streamline the learning and memorization process with visualizations like these. So these riffs create these visuals, obviously, but I also feel like the efficiency of these visualizations make these riffs learnable and therefore popular, if that makes sense. It's kind of a chicken and egg thing, or a co-constituting Ouroboros worm kind of deal. I'll talk a little more about these types of techniques in general at the end, but first a little more about this specific pattern. To point out the kind of obvious, there are line breaks in this visual, and they correspond to an intuitive way of grouping the section. Normally in both visual and aural grouping, we tend to hear longer gaps as the end of a group. But I think it makes sense here to hear the short groups at the end, because each of these steps of the pattern is based on mutations of a basic tresillo pattern, which is that super familiar and super old 3-3-2 rhythmic figure that you hear in pretty much all popular music. We start with one instance of this basic tresillo pattern, LLS. So ba, 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 ba. Then we get a longer one, the LLLS. So bata da bata da bata da bata bata da bata da bata da bata bata da bata da bata da bata. And then another longer one, which is LLLLS. So bata da bata da bata da bata da bata bata da bata da bata da bata da bata bata da bata da bata da bata da bata. Which then it keeps building, keeps expanding to turn into the double tresillo, which is LLLLSS, which adds up to a measure of 4/4. So bata da bata da bata da bata da bata 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 da bata da bata da bata da bata 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 da bata da bata da bata da bata bata. This double tresillo, or the 3-3-3-3-2-2 rhythm, is almost as common as the regular tresillo pattern. Then we get the basic tresillo again, one more of the truncated double tresillo, so the LLLLS, and then 2 basic tresillos to finish it out. Of course, if you know my channel at all, you know I'm going to point out the additive process in the first few chunks. But I think there's something more specifically cool about how this works. Basically, I think of it as starting from a point of stability, so the basic tresillo, that feels pretty familiar, and then it works to a different point of stability, the double tresillo, and then it fills in the space in between linearly with unstable items or members of the pattern. Remind you of anything? You guessed it, I'm going to compare these kind of intermediate steps to chromatic passing tones in tonal music, which have the exact same structure. You fill in the space between 2 stable states with every intervening unstable state, just like what happens here. And then to finish the analogy, maybe we can say that after arriving at this point of stability, there's a kind of neighbor note motion that dips back to the unstable LLLLS before resolving to 2 basic tresillos in a row. So translating this pattern of stability and instability into harmonic space might sound something like this. This is a little more abstract than I normally like to go with my music theory. In general, I like my music theory like I like my jungles, concrete. But I stand by the bigger claim that there's a kind of abstract play of stability and familiarity, which are kind of profoundly the same thing, in how this apparently random string of 3s and 2s is arranged. So yes, the point is to have something that's a little slippery and disorienting, but I think that once you learn the pattern, you can start to hear this internal logic of tension and release, stability and instability. In my dissertation, I have a chapter where I gathered a bunch of different perspectives on writing tricky metal riffs from actual metal musicians. One of the main takeaways from a lot of these interviews I did is that a lot of metal musicians rely on visual strategies, visual representations like these, and other sorts of counting strategies that are highly contextual. By which I mean that these strategies won't tell you much about the riff unless you already know it pretty well. So like here, I could give you this visualization, but you wouldn't know like actually how long the longs are and how short the shorts are. You wouldn't know, all the other stuff too, tempo, what notes it is, all of that stuff. This same arrangement of long and short could be fleshed out in a million different ways. This means that these visual aids like this are both more agile and flexible because they literally only have to have the bare minimum of information. But the other interesting thing about them is that this contextuality also points to the absolutely essential role that learning by ear plays in metal. Well, lots of metal musicians go through some sort of jazz or classical training that makes them comfortable with standard notation, especially when we get into the kind of proggy, technical, mathy side of things. Probably the majority of metal musicians do not, and instead they learn stuff by ear, they learn stuff from tabs, they learn stuff from watching other people play, and I think the sparseness of these contextual learning aids is a testament to how developed the ear becomes, to the point where, unlike a classical musician where you need like to have everything out in front of you and you're always just like playing with your eyes. Of course, I'm sorry, classical musicians, I know that's an overgeneralization, but unlike that, metal musicians need to be able to hear stuff, and if they use visuals, it's just to give them kind of the bare minimum to remember like these sorts of weird patterns. But anyways, yeah, you gotta go check out this album if you haven't already. I mean, just this very subtle slowdown of one of the best riffs I've heard in a long time from the first track is worth the price of admission. Okay, as always, make sure you're setting yourself up to get enough sleep so that you can be healthy of mind and body. See ya.